the usual critique that comes from the people who plan the digital surface on a publisher's site where a video might run is that nobody's interested in clicking through. Nobody wants to know more about these things. Let's just put the logo. We mainly want them to watch the story. That's all we have their attention for. All of those criticisms are actually useful in designing how the public can get to know about, can best get to know about a given media organization's commitment to, let's say, Albert or any other system. And that, I think, is a design challenge. For example, if you're doing a documentary or you're doing a news story that is of substantial length already, there's no harm in putting an inline message at the end that says, this was actually produced following these standards, and here's where we were 5 years ago, and here's where we are now, and show like a little bit of an infographic that shows the increase in the commitments, because people like to see change. Change attracts the human brain's attention more than a static statement. So if you say that you've moved the needle across 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, and now, and if there's a way to say that in 15 seconds, that's creative. There are enough people who will creatively come up with a way to do that. That's what political ads do often, and often they do it over lies. And you actually have something true to say. So there must be a creative way to do it in line if it's a video. And if it's text and like a plain text story with pictures in it, there must be a way to do that as well. So simply putting a link to, let's say, the energy standards body or the audit organization, and then putting a link to that, yes, it may not result in click-throughs. It may just result in awareness that the system exists. But I think there are more ways for media organizations to say that they're part of the solution and not just critiquing everybody else who's not part of the solution. Yeah, so this is actually where I feel an even bigger challenge lies, which is on the S part of ESG, the social part, social justice part. By and large, I find that the social justice angle internal to media organization newsrooms starts getting pigeonholed into staff diversity. And then those organizations that are actually more committed, they do make some efforts to hire. But then even there, what happens is, and they're willing to disclose as well, but you must have heard of the recent pushback earlier this year that the American organizations network that's supposed to disclose their hiring data, their actual staffing data, so many organizations, I think there were several hundred organizations that did not even meet the deadline to send their data to the professor who had been hired by the American Society of Newspaper Editors, ASNE, to put out the annual diversity report itself. So there was actually a bit of a regression relative to the social movement. There was a regression on being willing to openly admit maybe how white your newsrooms are, or in India, how maybe led by Hindu Brahmins that the newsrooms are. So there is a reluctance to disclose diversity because they know the newsroom staffing is not at all yet at the level where they could say this is representing America or representing this region. But even there, even if you get diversified in your staff, that doesn't mean your journalistic paradigm is automatically changing, because sometimes the way it works is you as the leader tend to say, okay, if this is a story about an issue that animates black people, we'll simply put the black reporter on it, and then they'll get the story right. But then you impose the older objectivity norms on the black reporter saying, I think you're quoting these people too much, or you're quoting these people in a way that that is looking like activism and not journalism. So you tend to apply some other types of standards, or can you really be objective in it? I mean, there are older views that say that women who've been assaulted somehow are not going to cover sexual assault stories objectively. The whole idea that the lived experience of the journalist as a as a person who's experienced assault earlier can actually help her do the story even better is a learning that's happening now. So there's more in the culture of quote unquote going away from objectivity to comprehensiveness in the story, to accuracy of perspectives, accuracy of lived experience, accuracy of the narrative and how the story is framed. Those are areas where everybody needs to do work, whether you're black or white or Asian and so forth. But that will not happen just from staffing. That happens when there is a discussion about inclusion and discourse itself in the newsroom on story selection, topic selection, framing, ethical framing, characterizations, not and optics, the optics of photography. If you're showing an occupation and you're showing one color in that occupation the most, like if you're showing scientists or you're showing executives and you're mostly showing white leaders and not others, there's a certain message that goes with those optics. Now newsrooms are beginning to change those kinds of things where there's more interest in optical diversity, but each of these things is their own element. One doesn't substitute for the other. So changing journalistic culture in the newsroom itself as part of the way stories are told and the way sourcing is done is actually cultural change. That's change that happens where you commit to the pro-democratic views of society that you also foster through journalism. And at some point, I think we're running up against that barrier about whether newsrooms being pro-democracy is going to hold us hostage, is going to open us to attack by regressive forces. If so, we don't know how to deal with that attack, so we're just going to all sides everything. That journey is actually ongoing now, and I think that journey, which is the political journey, has collided with the DEI movement in journalism also. So, and if these things are not figured out for slow journalism, for investigative, for enterprise reporting, it's hard to figure these things out for breaking news. For breaking news, it will just like, I'll quote you and I'll quote you and I'll quote you, and we just run the story, and before you know it, a whole bunch of black people are upset that you have again criminalized us. You have again shown us in bad light. You never came to us and asked us what we think of it. That risk still happens. And this complaint has come from Native American communities as well. Indigenous communities are often reported a certain way when white reporters go to those communities and report them. It's often around a trauma angle. It's often around a situation where they are in experiencing pain. But they never report indigenous communities, or they report fewer stories of indigenous communities actually being stewards of the environment. And in fact, that's the pushback that's now coming from America's First Nations, that they're saying, we can give inputs to stewardship for climate change, but you've got to come and ask us. The only time you come and tell us and actually report on us, if it's only about the pain we're experiencing because of this or that, then that always positions us as only marginalized and not capable of input into the broader discourse.